into practice today, presented by SiriusXM. Ethan Greenberg and Eric Allen live here in Florham Park as the Jets and Texans are set for a Saturday matchup at MetLife Stadium. EA Jets coming off their first win in 6 games. When you look at the stats, only 248 total yards, but the Jets obviously won with a comeback drive led by Sam Darnold and Robbie Anderson. What can the Jets take from Week 14 and move on to Week 15, and what can they do a little better Saturday?
Greens, before we get to that, I'd like to petition the NFL to have more Saturday games in December. I'm loving the schedule. How about you?
Yeah, I do like the schedule. Okay. It's a little different than our norm, but I like the curveball.
Yeah, but what the Jets can take out of their ball game against the Buffalo Bills, they were able to finish. And that's something they've been talking about for weeks now. When are you going to be able to finish? Because the week before, they blew a lead against the Tennessee Titans at a 16-0 advantage and were unable to close the door. But against the Buffalo Bills, they showed a lot of mettle, especially their young quarterback, Sam Darnold, becoming the youngest quarterback in the history of this league to lead a team from behind a game-winning drive there late. He got the ball with 2:30 left in Orchard Park, went right down the field. That key conversion up top to Robbie Anderson for a 37-yard game. But what the Jets can take from that is, number one is, this team isn't quitting. This team has a lot of character. That this team wants to go out on a high note this week, and that's one thing that number 14 said this week, is that I just want to play with more consistency down the stretch. The Jets are going to be without Isaiah Crowell, their top rusher, and without Quincy Enunwa, their top receiver, Saturday against the Texans. But let's shift gears to the Houston Texans. One of the hottest teams in the NFL as of a couple weeks ago. They were 0-3 to start the season. Then 9 straight they won. Lost their first game last week since September 23rd to the Crosstown Giants, coincidentally. But when you look at the numbers on really how the Texans lost last week, the eye-popping number is just their rush yards per game. You look at weeks 4 through 13, they averaged 366 yards a game. That's monumental. 146 of those come on the ground. Last week, only 89 rushing yards. Yeah, Lamar Miller has been a force for the Texans this year, the former Miami Dolphin. I know a lot of Jets fans are familiar with him. And Deshaun Watson is also a guy who can scoot. I think he's more of a pocket passer, but he's a phenomenal athlete in his own right. But like you mentioned, Indianapolis came to Houston last week, and they made them one-dimensional, Greens. They bottled up that run game. They took a lead, and then they got after Deshaun Watson. That defense of the Colts sent the blitz early and often after they took the lead, racking up 5 sacks in all. I think that's what the Jets want to do here again this week. I thought they were pretty good against the Buffalo Bills. We know that Josh Allen went for over 100 yards against the Jets. But other than that, they did not have much of a run game at all. And I thought the Jets' defensive line, that front 7, they dictated play. I thought they won the battle in the trenches after what happened in Week 10 here at MetLife Stadium. We're going to dive into Deshaun Watson a little later on the show on Practice Today, presented by SiriusXM. But when you look at the Texans, you mentioned, and the Texans-Colts matchup of last week, You mentioned the rushing game. You mentioned Lamar Miller briefly, but really Andrew Luck threw for 399 yards. T.Y. Hilton had about 200 yards. And what stuck out to me was that the Colts got out to an early lead. They were on top 17-7. So then you put the ball in Deshaun Watson's hand as opposed to rushing for 150 yards a game, which the Texans did in weeks 4 through 13. So how can the Jets almost try to replicate the Colts' version for success? It's a great question, because when you look at that game, people in Indianapolis were saying this is the best Andrew Luck has looked all season. And while Sam Darnold continues to develop, I don't know if you can expect Sam Darnold to come out this week, Greens, and throw for 399 yards. But T.Y. Hilton was on the receiving end of 199 of those passing yards. So this Texans secondary has sprung a few leaks, not only just against the Indianapolis Colts, because if you look at them over the last 3 games, they have given up more pass yards than anybody in the National Football League. That's 1,043. So teams are airing the ball out against the Texans. Some of that probably is because they had a lead the 2 prior games before Indianapolis, but luck got hot last week, and T.Y. Hilton is one of the speedsters in the National Football League. Well, the Jets have a speedster themselves, and Robbie Anderson, and they'll probably be dependent on him even more this week, Greens, because Quincy Enunwa out of the lineup, like you mentioned, 4 receptions, 76 yards, and the touchdown against the Bills last week.
You mentioned Sam Darnold in the sense that he's thrown for 300 yards once, I believe, week 2 against the Dolphins. Yeah. So not expecting him to put up 400 yards like Andrew Luck, but I do want to bring up Robbie Anderson and T.Y. Hilton because they have similar skill sets from a speed perspective. You mentioned the Texans' issues in the secondary, but this Saturday has a heavy dose of rain coming into the Northeast in MetLife Stadium. How is that going to impact Saturday's game?
Well, we'll have to see when we're out there because I'm sure both teams were preparing for the rain this week, probably putting a little water on the balls. The Texans said they were going to do that this week. Bill O'Brien leading that team down there in Houston, and that's the old trick. Getting ready for the game and then inclement weather game on Saturday for both of these squads. But I think the run game probably comes more into focus. You got Eli McGuire and Trenton Cannon, 2 guys who got into the lineup, into the mix last week. And Eli McGuire had 17 carries. That's a career high for him. And it was nice to see Trenton Cannon get in the end zone. He's another guy who can give you another element, explosion. But we'll have to see how bad the elements are. But it's just another step for Sam Darnold because a lot of people were asking, how's this guy going to perform in a cold? Well, he aced his first test. Now, this week, it might be the rain.
And if you remember, Sam Darnold's pro day back in Los Angeles was down in the pouring rain. I believe it was March 14th if we're going to go back into that.
Couple days before Mike McCagnon strikes the trade with the Indianapolis Colts going up from 6-3. Who would have thought Sam Darnold would be there at number 3 overall? The Browns obviously happy with their quarterback in Baker Mayfield. They got him number 1 overall. But if you're a Jets fan, you got to be delighted Sam Darnold, number 14, is here in green and white.
It's funny how things shake out. You mentioned Eli McGuire and Trenton Cannon. Both of those guys are questionable for Saturday's game. Eli McGuire has an ankle injury. Trenton Cannon has a toe injury. Again, we mentioned Isaiah Crowell out for Saturday's game with a toe injury. But earlier this week, defensively speaking, Jamal Adams spoke to the media about the Houston Texans and what challenges they present.
Well, obviously, they got Deshaun running it. Great friend of mine, obviously, and, they have, D-Hop running all the routes. D. Thomas is another, phenomenal receiver that they have, and as well as the running backs, Blue, Miller. They have a little bit of everything, man, so we're definitely looking forward to the challenge.
It's been a long time since this team made the playoffs, certainly long before you got here.
Yeah.
How much does it motivate you to be part of the turnaround? Like when that happens, to be one of the key guys turning it around?
Yeah, most definitely, man. That's our goal. Obviously, it hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened since I've been here, like you said. But our goal is to make it to the playoffs. Our goal is, like everybody's goal in the league, is to get to the Super Bowl and win it. But that's our next step. That's our next goal, and we got to reach it. I can't put a timetable on that. That's not my job. All I can do is just continue to get better and continue to motivate others around me.
Always great to hear from Jamal Adams, one of the captains on the Jets here. And as we move forward, before we dive in to the Houston Texans a little bit more, let's talk about EA's favorite segment every week, In the Game with EA. And
hold on. Last week you asked me about cornerbacks, I think, but you added a safety and Eddie Jackson in the mix.
It was a typo in the question. I take responsibility. It was supposed to be defensive backs. Yeah. Therefore, the bases are covered.
Somebody should edit you back there. It should be the maestro, Chad Freeman.
All right, so in the game with EA this week, Week 15, give a little specialist love given what happened last weekend in Buffalo with Andre Roberts and Jason Myers. So in franchise history, 3 Jets specialists have made the Pro Bowl. Can you name them? EA's going to give his answers later on in the show. Comment your guess. There's only 3. There are 2 players that made the AFL All-Star game, but that was before the merger, so that doesn't count.
3? Does that include kickers?
Kickers, punters, and returners. And we will get to the answer later on in the show, but let's move forward here. We talked about how the Houston Texans, one of the hottest teams in the NFL. How do you cool them off? What's the first thing you go for to try to cool off the Houston Texans?
You got to somehow Slow down that pass rush, because when you look at the Texans' defense, it starts with J.J. Watt. He's got 12.5 sacks on the year. And then Jadeveon Clowney, he's explosive as ever. They move him around. They actually call him in their defense the jack linebacker. Whitney Merciless is a big name. He's only got 3.5 sacks so far this year, but it all starts with number 99. He can ruin your entire afternoon. He can ruin your weekend. Another thing that Sam Darnold really has to account for is not only is Watt going to be targeting him, he's going to be targeting the football, because he's really adept at getting those strip sacks as well.
J.J. Watt has 5 forced fumbles this season, and we're going to talk about J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney a little bit later. Let's focus on Deshaun Watson. We briefly mentioned him. Deshaun Watson is the third dual quarterback in a row that the Jets will be facing. You got to go back to Tennessee with Marcus Mariota. Then you got to go last week to Josh Allen. Then this week with Deshaun Watson. All three of those guys, very different athletes. But when you look at Deshaun Watson in particular, he's 4th in the NFL in rushing yards. And the Jets, after giving up a large chunk of yards to Josh Allen in the first half, I believe 87 on 9 carries or 8 carries for Josh Allen, that really shut him down in the second half.
Yeah, they did. He was held to, 14 yards in the second half. But this guy is a different animal. He's completing 67% of his passes. Josh Allen's about 52%. And he also has perhaps a top 1, a top 2, a top 3 receiver in the National Football League on the outside in DeAndre Hopkins. And the Texans went out after Will Fuller got hurt. They made a trade with the Denver Broncos. They brought in Demaryius Thomas. So they have another big weapon opposite him as well. Watson can do it all. He was so impressive his rookie season. Then I believe he went down and practiced with the ACL tear after 6 or 7 games. And a lot of people were wondering, well, what is this guy going to be in his second professional season? He looks the same to me. In fact, Greens, he might be better than ever. And this guy, as Todd Bowles said this week, he's a gamer. He led Clemson in 2 national championship games. Of course, that 35-31 win as the Tigers won that national championship in an epic battle against Alabama. But so far in his National Football League career, he's been really good. And think about it. They got him number 12 overall in the 2017 draft, and I know they're quite happy about that.
Deshaun Watson, you saw on the slate there, completing 66.9% of his passes. Well, actually, in weeks 8 through 14, he's completing 73% of his passes. But good news here, the Jets' defense has performed well the past 2 weeks against rushing quarterbacks. When you look at the fact that they had 6 sacks in total, 3 each game, and they knocked down the quarterback 19 times in those 2 games. Last week, they hit Josh Allen 12 times. So the Jets' outside linebackers are getting after a little bit these past couple weeks.
Yeah, and a lot of people in Houston will say that if there is one weakness for Superman, who is Deshaun Watson, is that he struggled sometimes with the blitz so far this season. And we mentioned before the Colts were dialing up the pressure once they got the lead. Jordan Jenkins, Brandon Copeland, Frankie Louvu, those guys on the outside, yes, they have to get to the quarterback, but they have to maintain their rush integrity again this week because, like you mentioned, Greens, it doesn't get any easier against a guy like Watson because he's more than 400 rush yards on the ground. But he is an accomplished passer in the pocket. We got to say that because I think Watson, coming out of school, a lot of people were saying, how is he going to make the transition in the National Football League? Well, he's made the transition quite well.
You mentioned DeAndre Hopkins and Demaryius Thomas briefly. Well, DeAndre Hopkins so far this season is absolutely tearing up the NFL. 84 receptions, 1,151 yards, 9 touchdowns. But Demaryius Thomas is an interesting one because the Jets saw him in Week 5 as a member of the Denver Broncos. He had a season-high 105 yards that week.
He got that late touchdown, I think, at Darryl Roberts. That was in garbage time.
But since being traded to the Houston Texans, he really hasn't done a lot. He only has 14 receptions, which accounts to 2.8 receptions per game since being traded to Houston.
But do you remember we were talking about it even before the Jets played the Broncos as his numbers were down because we were talking about Emmanuel Sanders. And he just might be at this point in his career where he is right now. He has become a complimentary receiver, and that's not we're not dissing him. We're not taking a shot at him. I just think he's been in the league for a while. Probably still has some tread on those tires, but not as much as he used to.
What a change! What a scene change for the Denver Broncos, real quick, entering the 2018 season with Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. Yeah. Right now, 2 rookies lead the charge for the Broncos: Cortland Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton.
But enough about the Broncos. Look at this guy. Enough about the Broncos news here.
Enough about the Broncos.
Hey, and I will add, because you mentioned Jamal Adams before, he's talked about DeAndre Hopkins this week. He said he's a dog.
Yeah, well, let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins because he is a dog.
Complimentary. That's a complimentary term, folks out there.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for clarifying. But DeAndre Hopkins is debatably the top receiver in the NFL this season. It really depends how you want to shake things out, but he's the top target on the Texans, no doubt about it. What makes him so dangerous?
Hands, physical. Can get down the field, good speed. I mean, you've seen the catches, Green.
Yeah. The hamstring catch is what sticks out.
The guy is stick-em on his hands. Anything, and his catch radius is huge. So Deshaun Watson doesn't have to, even though he's completing nearly 67% of his passes, he doesn't have to be on the money all the time, because if you throw it in his area code, DeAndre Hopkins is coming down.
Well, how about the Jets secondary then? Trumaine Johnson, 3 interceptions in 2 weeks. He had 2 of them last week against Josh Allen, and the Bills sealed the deal for the Jets in Orchard Park. Have you kind of seen an uptick in the secondary these past couple of weeks? Because it feels like the secondary's playing a lot better.
Well, you have to credit Trumaine Johnson. He was dealing with that quad injury early in the season, and the ball seems to find good players, and it has the last couple weeks. 3 interceptions. The one thing on the injury report that stood out to me, in addition to Crowell being out and Enunwa being out, is Johnson appeared on the injury report, and he was dealing with some foot soreness today. Todd Bowles indicated he'll be a game-time decision. I think they really need him on the field this week, because when I was thinking about Hopkins, who are you going to put him against? I think maybe you go Trumaine Johnson there. Maybe you take your chances, Morris Claiborne with Demaryius Thomas. But Jamal Adams, week in, week out, gives you great play back there in the secondary. He's becoming a leader on this football team. And then finally, you got to give credit to Swag, Darryl Roberts, who's come in there, was playing cornerback early in the season, and now has taken over basically the free safety spot for the Jets and done a nice job. So you got to credit all those guys. But this week is going to be a bigger challenge back there. No offense to the Bills, but right now the Texans definitely a more accomplished passing offense.
And the Texans have debatably one of the best, if not the best, pass rush duo in the NFL with J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney. And the Jets' offensive line, a different look ever since James Carpenter was shelved on IR. Spencer Long at left guard, Jonathan Harrison at center. The Jets rushed for 156 yards against the Titans, only 78 last week against the Bills. But what do you expect from this offensive line this week against J.J. Watt, who's just may be one of the best, if not the best, pass rusher in the NFL?
Yeah, we got to credit our own Randy Lang here, who always comes up with the great stats. And he wrote about this for NewYorkJets.com, that Sam Darnold, not only did he not get sacked against the Buffalo Bills, but there were 0 quarterback hits. That doesn't happen often. So they basically pitched a no-no. It's going to be tough to pitch a no-no
yes,
against this defensive front. But what you want to do early in drives and possessions on first down is make sure you get 5 and 6 yard gains so you have second and manageables. I think if you're playing 3rd and long against this team, especially Greens, you're going to be in trouble.
Here's a fun fact for you. J.J. Watt hasn't had back-to-back games without a sack since weeks 1 and 2 of the NFL. And at that time, the Texans were 0-2. Right now, the Texans are 9-4. And J.J. Watt's really leading the charge defensively.
Yep.
I feel like there's been so much news about Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, but J.J. Watt doesn't get the same kind of love that those two guys get, at least this season. And I think people forget how good J.J. Watt has been for the Texans.
I think it's fair because Khalil Mack, and rightfully so, because we talked about it as well, because the Jets faced the Chicago Bears early this season, and that was such a monstrous deal. because you thought there's no way the Oakland Raiders are going to trade Khalil Mack, and then sure enough, they traded Khalil Mack. And now you look at what the Bears' defense has become with him lining up at that edge pass rusher. And then you think about the L.A. Rams. Defensively, they haven't put up great numbers, but if you watch the games, Aaron Donald is a force, man.
He's a freak.
Yeah.
He's a freak. He's a force, whatever you want to call him.
And then you get back to J.J. Watt. I kind of think we take it for granted. It's like LeBron James. He's been in the NBA Finals 8-9 years in a row, whatever. You know, like J.J. Watt is just, he is a freak. And he missed, more than half of last year?
Yeah, he missed a significant chunk of time.
Yeah, and a guy comes back this year, and Todd Bowles was asked about him and said, well, does he look any different? No, he doesn't look different at all.
Sam Darnold did not line up against Khalil Mack, who's dealing with an ankle injury against the Chicago Bears in Week 8.
Yep.
He will be facing J.J. Watt unless something crazy happens, and Darnold talked about J.J. Watt and this Texans defense earlier this week.
You know, I think for us, it's just about continuing to play our football, getting in and out. For me, it's playing fast, just being able to move through my progressions pretty fast and understand where everyone is on the field. So I think that's the biggest thing, and just continuing to stay consistent with that.
You said playing fast. Do you almost have to protect against getting too fast? Obviously, the instinct is going to be to get it out quick because you prefer your head to still be attached. But
yeah.
do you want to have to protect against speeding up too much against guys like that?
No, I mean, I'm just going to continue to try to move as fast as possible through the progression, but at the same time, if I feel like I need to give a receiver more time to get open, then I'm going to hang on to it. And because I know in my head, you know, you can feel if in a pocket when you're a quarterback sitting back there with guys like J.J. Watt and Clowney rushing you kind of have a feeling of, okay, I might need to get this ball out a little quicker. So you might sit back and let a guy rush, and you got to get the ball out or run or do something. So I think that internal clock stays the same. But, yeah, I think you can definitely give a receiver a little bit more time to get in and out of his route.
Perhaps the toughest test for Sam Darnold comes this weekend with J.J. Watt and the Houston Texans pass rush, including Jadeveon Clowney. But now, EA, it is time for In the Game with EA here on Practice Today, presented by SiriusXM. Again, the question is, in franchise history, 3 Jets specialists have made it to the Pro Bowl.
Bruce Harper?
Can you name them? Bruce Harper is not one of them.
No, I'm very disappointed. Pat Leahy?
Pat Leahy is not one of them. I will give you a clue.
Nick Folk?
Nick Folk is not one of them. Can I give you a clue?
Santana Moss?
No.
Justin Miller?
Yes, that's one of them. That's one of them.
Chad Morton?
No. One of them came after Justin Miller.
After?
Yeah.
Justin Miller.
Justin Miller made it in 2006. This next guy made it in 2008 when EA was in the building.
Oh, Leon Washington.
Oh, there it is. There's number 2.
That's my guy, Leon Washington. Come on now. Even though
well, he's your guy. You guessed like 10 guys before him.
Did I? Well, yeah. You got to cover kickers and punters.
That's
too.
fair. All right, there's one more.
So give Mike Westhoff a lot of credit there. And speaking of special teams coordinators, Brant Boyer's having an unbelievable year. Just give me the position.
Punter.
Decade.
1990s. It is a fantastic name.
Tommy Tupa?
Tommy Tupa.
Right.
Great name.
Thanks for the help.
No problem.
Yeah.
We're teammates here.
Yes.
On Jets 360
we are teammates.
And Practice Today. All right, there you have it.
Was that a Will Ferrell movie, Teammates, or something like that?
Step Brothers?
Step Brothers, that's good enough. Close enough.
All right, there you have it. Leon Washington, Justin Miller,
Maybe we should bring Bree on the show sometimes. I like her reactions to everything. Yes.
All right, Step Brothers, teammates, one and the same.
And then Frank the Tank over here on my camera. He's having fun, but he was not appalled by Teammates.
Okay. You ready to move on?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, it's time for the 2-minute drill. Jets.
I don't even know what day it is. It feels like Friday.
It feels like Friday. It's a Thursday. But now it's time for the 2-minute drill. Jets Texans Saturday, 4:30. EA. The Texans defense is headlined by J.J. Watt, but really they're having a lot of struggles in the secondary.
Yeah, Greens, you're right about that. Over the course of the last 3 games, the Titans have yielded 1,043 yards throughout the air. That is the most in the National Football League. Last week against the Indianapolis Colts, Andrew Luck passed for 399 yards, and T.Y. Hilton had 199 yards receiving. Sam Darnold, if he is afforded time, he might have an opportunity to get the long ball going to Robbie Anderson. And those guys connected 4 times last week against the Bills for 76 yards, including a critical 37-yarder. So watch the Jets pass game, which is missing Quincy Enunwa this week against the Texans secondary.
Most fans are going to have their eyes on Sam Darnold and Deshaun Watson and the signal callers, but there's a battle of the bayou in the back for both the Jets and the Texans.
It seems like every week we're talking about Jamal Adams and his relationships, especially with guys he went to LSU with or shares the LSU name with. This week it is the Honey Badger. It was well documented in the offseason by Jamal Adams himself. He tried to get Tyrann Mathieu here to New York, but Mathieu instead signed with the Houston Texans. With that being said, both of these guys are having fantastic years, similar statistical years, I think, and they can each do a lot of things. As Jamal Adams said this week, he calls them the Badge. Those guys are close friends, but these guys are playing safety at a very high level. Todd Bowles said this week of Mathieu, he is a guy who has a lot of football intelligence, a high football IQ. And DeAndre Hopkins said of Jamal Adams, this is an ultimate compliment. The guy's a monster.
Both defenses are going to be shifted into focus more so this weekend because of the rain that's supposed to be hitting MetLife Stadium.
Yeah, rain is in the forecast, and both teams are going to be dealing with that. Last week, Sam Darnold played in a very cold environment for the first time in his career, and he aced that test against the Buffalo Bills, leading the Jets come from behind to a victory over the Bills. Well, this week he'll probably be playing in the rain, but so will Deshaun Watson. Expect both of those guys to be ready because during practice this week, they were using wet balls to get acclimated to the slick conditions. So we'll see what happens on Saturday night at MetLife Stadium. But after conquering the cold, it is now, let's see what you do against the wet, Sam Darnold.
Jets and Texans Saturday, 4:30, Week 15. And if you like practice today, presented by SiriusXM, you're going to love Pregame Central, presented by Pepsi. EA, Anthony Beck back at MetLife Stadium Saturday, 2:30, because of a 4:30 kick. Any guests this week?
Not yet, but I might have a surprise or two.
He always has a couple things up his sleeves, but you're going to have to tune in to Pregame Central, presented by Pepsi, to find out what those are. That's all we have here on Practice Today, presented by SiriusXM. We'll see you Saturday.